Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. It's been something of a slow news week this week. Don't have an awful lot to talk about. Although there is one thing that I've been meaning to mention, it's something that I've been noticing quite a bit on YouTube lately, and if you've been spending any length of time on this platform as either a viewer or a creator, you've probably noticed it too. It's to do with YouTube screwing its own creators over video sponsorships, and appropriately enough, here's a sponsorship illustrating exactly the sort of thing that I'm talking about. Long-time viewers of the channel may be aware that I am something of a fan of movie and comic book paraphernalia, with a wide selection scattered around just about every room in the house. But there is one room in particular that's given me some problems, and Displate is here to help. You may also be aware that I am something of a fan of the first two Alien movies, and if there's one thing that Displate has, it's a wide selection of Alien posters, and not just Alien posters. But the Alien posters were the ones in particular that I was interested in, because I know what I like and I like what I damn well know. And amongst the wide range of stuff available, they actually had some of my favourite Dark Horse Comics Aliens cover art from the 90s and early 2000s, including this one by legendary Canadian Dark Horse Comics artist Denis Beauvais, the first person that I ever actually saw paint a comic rather than draw one. And the problem that I needed Displate's help with was this in my office, this canvas frame of Star Wars video game box cover art. Although the problem I had wasn't really the art itself, although I've never really loved it that much, it was what the art was hiding. This nasty-ass glue residue on the walls from the acoustic tiles that I had to stick up to prevent echo when I was recording videos when I'd first moved in and there was nothing else in the room. And this is what I wanted Displate's help with. I mean, yeah, alright, I know, I could just repaint the walls, and I probably should just repaint the walls, but then I'd be sticking the posters up over the freshly painted walls anyway, and this just seems like cutting out the middleman. Also, it's a lot easier, especially since it's so incredibly easy to actually mount anything using Displate's wall magnet fixtures that come with each poster. So you don't have to spend additional cash on buying frames or getting any kind of mounting equipment. It's all provided. It all took no time whatsoever to put up, with no additional materials or expenses required, and I think you'll agree, it looks a lot better. And you can get this, or whatever you choose for yourself, by going to displate.com/@mightyjingles. Discount is applied automatically at checkout, or just use my code mightyjingles to get 25% off one Displate, 32% off 2 or 3 Displates, or 37% off 4 or more Displates. Honestly, the range is so extensive, I guarantee they'll have something that takes your fancy. So what did any of that have to do with YouTube screwing me over? Well, here's my question, and it goes to all of you, regardless of whether or not you watched that Displate sponsorship or whether or not you skipped it. Because what I'm reasonably sure has happened to every single one of you who is now at this part of the video is that the second that sponsored section started, and let me remind you, this is one of my own sponsorships. It's got nothing to do with YouTube. YouTube doesn't earn any money from that. The second that sponsored section started, YouTube gave you all the option to click a button and skip past it entirely to this part of the video. Have you noticed how YouTube isn't giving you the option to skip their adverts, and in fact demands that you pay them a monthly subscription in order to go advert-free, even though some of those subscriptions do actually still come with advertising, and actively tries to punish you if you run an ad blocker. But they're entirely happy to give you the option to skip my adverts, the adverts that YouTube doesn't earn any actual revenue from. And don't forget, YouTube's my employer. This is like, honestly, it's like working in the service industry. I mean, technically I am working in the service industry. I'm providing an entertainment service. Seriously, bear with me here as I run this parallel. It might sound a little stupid at first, but let me explain. Being a YouTube content creator these days is like waiting tables in a restaurant. Although, if I'm being completely honest, waiting tables in a restaurant is a harder job. But there are definite similarities here. In a lot of economies, the money that you make from serving tables in a restaurant isn't really enough to get by on. And I have a lot of YouTube subscribers. But even with 650,000 subscribers, it's been a few years since a YouTuber of my size was able to get by on a sustainable level just from YouTube advertising alone. YouTube itself has poisoned that well. But in the same way that the basic wage, which is usually minimum and sometimes below minimum wage, isn't enough for a waiter or a waitress to get by, and they rely on tips to make up the difference. A YouTuber needs things like Patreon, Floatplane, or video sponsorships to get by, because the basic advertising revenue on YouTube is dog shit, and has been for several years now. Except what YouTube are doing by forcing you to watch their own adverts, but giving you the ability to skip my sponsorships. It's like turning up for work as a waitress in a job that pays minimum wage or less, and having the restaurant owner go around the tables and warn all of the guests not to tip you. Or even worse, takes all of your tips for themselves. Do you remember when Google was founded as a company, their motto was "Don't be evil"? Yeah, it was a more innocent age, wasn't it? Anyway, so I did say it was a bit of a slow news week this week. There hasn't been an awful lot happened, either personally or in the gaming world. I mean, there's some news, obviously. I suppose we should kick things off with some free games, maybe? So, the Steam Summer Sale is over. But the Epic Game Store Summer Sale just kicked off a couple of days ago, and they opened with a massive freebie. You can get the Civilization 6 Platinum Edition, which normally goes for $80, because it not only includes the base game, you also get the Rise and Fall and Gathering Storm expansions and 6 separate DLC packs. And it's 100% free on the Epic Game Store until July 24th. And of course the other very important thing about Civilization 6 is it was the last Civilization game that was any good. Now, the Epic Store doesn't do the huge deep discounts that, well, yeah, I mean, sure, 100% off is a pretty huge deep discount, but other than the free game, the Epic Store doesn't do the huge 95% deep discounts that you would get in the Steam Summer Sale, but there are still some bargains to be had. You can get It Takes Two for $12, Star Wars Jedi Survivor for $14, Alan Wake Remastered for $4.49, Far Cry 5, the last Far Cry game that was any good, for $9, Homeworld Deserts of Karak for, honestly, I think they're probably still overcharging you a bit, for $5, Titanfall 2 Ultimate Edition for $4.49, and, wait, is this a joke? No, they're serious about this. Dragon Age The Veilguard for $30. And that's probably still $30 too expensive, but hey. I mean, I suppose it technically qualifies as being on sale, since it's not the full asking price, but is it really on sale? Because, I mean, Veilguard missed its sales targets by 50% on account of being a thoroughly, at best, mediocre game that cost way too much to make. I mean, in the same way that other massive flops, prices plummeted within months of release, like Redfall, like Skull and Bones, like Fallout 76, which they were practically given away within a couple of weeks of the release date. This isn't really so much as the game going on sale as it is the publisher desperately trying to recover some of their investment by getting absolutely anybody to play it. Although technically, I suppose it does count as being on sale, so there you go. You can also get Dragon Age The Veilguard for $30 in the Epic Game Store Summer Sale. And another thing, while it is true, I mean, you can get some absolutely huge discounts in the Epic Store sale. Some games are discounted by as much as 95%. They just don't do as many of those huge deep discounts as you would get on the Steam Summer Sale. But the one thing that the Epic Game Store does do that Steam doesn't is Epic Rewards Program. So, and it's been boosted for the Summer Sale. So what this means is that 20% of everything that you spend in the store, whether that's games, add-ons, virtual currency, whatever, gets returned to you in the form of rewards that can be used for other purchases. So if you were to spend $30 on Dragon's Age The Veilguard, you'd get $6 back, which you could then put towards something like Titanfall 2, which is also on sale, which means you could effectively get that for free. So, yeah. The Epic Store Summer Sale, it's going on until the 1st of August. Although if you want to get the Civilization 6 thing for free, you need to get that before the 24th of July, because that's when that particular offer ends. Anyway, good luck. Happy shopping. I suppose the big gaming news this week is the continuing developments in the Subnautica 2 publishers versus developers drama. So I covered this last week, but there have been more developments. And basically, in a nutshell, what you have is obviously the original Subnautica was a massively popular and successful indie game. Massive congratulations, extremely well done to the development studio Unknown Worlds for the success of Subnautica. And yes, I am aware that there has been some internet drama surrounding the lead up to and publication of the not quite Subnautica 2 Below Zero. But the initial game itself did amazingly well, and it was an incredibly good game. All of their success was well deserved. So successful, the South Korean publisher Krafton snapped up Unknown Worlds, the development team, for $500 million. That's a lot of money. That's an extremely large amount of money for an indie game studio of the size of Unknown Worlds. It's not that Subnautica is the only game that they've done, or the only game that they had done at the time that Krafton bought them out. They were also responsible for Half-Life Natural Selection, Natural Selection 2, but those were back, well, they were a really long time ago. Half-Life Natural Selection came out in 2002, and it wasn't even a game, it was just a mod for Half-Life. But it was fairly successful, and so they started work on a commercial sequel called Natural Selection 2. Shortly afterwards, Charlie Cleveland and Max Maguire, the founders, along with their CEO Ted Gill, formally founded Unknown Worlds Entertainment as a commercial computer game studio. And that's when they started work on Subnautica. It was in development for roughly 6 years, and obviously massively successful. They weren't exactly 100% an independent studio throughout, because the publisher Perfect World bought a 40% stake in Unknown Worlds in 2011, and then raised it to a controlling interest in 2013 by getting a further 20%. But during the 2019 fiscal year, Perfect World sold the majority of its shares back to the studio's founders, and sold the remainder in 2021 to the founders at a $50 million valuation. And this was only a few months before the acquisition by Krafton, the South Korean games publisher. And Krafton paid $500 million to buy Unknown Worlds out, with an option to pay them another $250 million if they met their early access targets, and that's going to be important. But bearing in mind how much the Chinese media conglomerate Perfect World had paid for their controlling interest in the studio, and how much the founders had paid to buy that controlling interest back, I cannot help but think that perhaps, maybe, it's just a little bit possible that Krafton, by upfronting $500 million with an option to hand over another $250 million later, they might have just overvalued the company just a little bit. So that's up to $750 million, and that's not even factoring in the day-to-day running costs of running a games development studio. But let's just stick with that $750 million figure. Bearing in mind that was a $500 million purchase price with a $250 million bonus payable if the development studio managed to get the game into early access in 2025. So $750 million. Now Subnautica was good, but it wasn't $750 million good. And the one thing that you are not going to do by making Subnautica 2 is achieve $750 million in sales. But they knew this. They weren't completely stupid. Krafton knew that they weren't really so much buying a game with Subnautica 2 as they were buying a franchise. They didn't want to just make money off the game sales, although obviously they're going to be very happy to do that. They also wanted to make money off a Subnautica TV series, a Subnautica movie, hell, if it came down to it, Subnautica lunchboxes. You know, they were in it for the franchising and the merchandise, and that's where they saw they were going to make the return on their $750 million investment on an indie game studio. So where's all the drama come from? Well, $500 million is an eye-watering amount of money to pay for an indie game studio, but the $250 million bonus to be paid if the studio managed to get the game into early access this year isn't exactly chump change either. So when the publisher Krafton announced, slightly more than a week ago, that despite all expectations and assurances from the game developers that the game was in fact ready to go into early access in 2025, but the publisher said, actually, no, it isn't, we're delaying it until 2026. Oh, and by the way, the two founders and their CEO are fired. A lot of people started calling foul. Seemed awfully suspicious that this should happen just within 6 months of the publisher having to stump up an extra $250 million to be paid to the developers. Well, shortly afterwards, you'll never guess what happened, a presentation got leaked by somebody, don't know who, that appeared to exonerate the publisher, claiming that the development team had failed to meet all kinds of checkpoints on the roadmap to early access. Krafton, the publisher, then confirmed the leak and then threw oil on the fire by firing the two founders and their CEO and claiming that they had been fired for neglecting their responsibilities by allowing the game development to stagnate while they were pursuing their own independent projects. More on this one in a moment. Well, this week's development is the lawsuit against the publisher Krafton by Charlie Cleveland, Max McGuire, the two founders, and their former CEO, Ted Gill. And in this lawsuit, there are some pretty explosive accusations being made. And though I haven't actually seen, because that's not publicly available yet, the specific contracts that the lawsuit is referring to, I'm pretty confident that they wouldn't be citing them in a lawsuit unless they actually had them ready and available as evidence. And what it all boils down to is this. In order to avoid paying that $250 million bonus, Krafton, the publisher, messed around in the development of Subnautica 2, took control of the Unknown World studio, fired the founders without cause, all of this in breach of the 2021 Equity Purchase Agreement. This is the document they're referring to in the lawsuit that saw Krafton acquire the studio. The publisher promised to leave creative and operational control in the hands of the founders. They broke that promise. They promised to consult with the founders before taking any action that could harm the $250 million bonus. They broke that promise. They promised not to terminate the three founders without cause. They broke that promise. In fact, the lawsuit even goes into specific detail about this one, because apparently, according to the lawsuit, honestly, I cannot believe Krafton signed off on this. If they did, they deserve everything that's coming to them. But according to the lawsuit, none of the three founders could be dismissed by the publisher without the consent of the other two founders. So, unless all three of them agree to fire themselves, I think the publisher's got some explaining to do. Speaking of which, among the justifications that Krafton used to justify the firing of these three guys, in particular, they complained that rather than guiding the development of Subnautica 2, Charlie Cleveland in particular was away in Europe chasing after his own independent movie projects. Do you remember that part? Hold that in your head for a moment. Let's go back to the whole $750 million. Subnautica was good, but it wasn't $750 million good. And if they were going to make a return on that scale of an investment, what they were buying wasn't Subnautica 2, it was a Subnautica franchise. They didn't just want a Subnautica 2 game, they also wanted a Netflix Subnautica TV show. They wanted an Amazon Prime Subnautica movie. They wanted Subnautica books, Subnautica anime. They wanted Subnautica lunchboxes. They basically just wanted to build a huge Subnautica franchise. All of this specifically laid out in the contract signed between the publisher and the development studio. And all of these personal side projects that the founders were apparently doing rather than doing their job by steering the development of the game into early access, that were cited by the publisher as the primary reasons why they fired the three of them, even though they didn't have the right to fire any of them. The personal movie project that Charlie Cleveland was apparently working on in France, that was the Subnautica movie that had been sent there by the publisher's CEO specifically to do. And they were claiming it was a personal movie project. But seriously though, I mean, let's just be serious for a moment here. In defense of the publisher, you do have to admit that if there's one thing that indie game devs are known for, well, it's not making games, is it? Nah, that's a mug's game. In fact, just the other day I was in Nice. I was in a fancy restaurant just off the beach, and I saw Robert De Niro. The poor bugger couldn't catch a minute's rest. He's just trying to have a cappuccino, and there's a constant stream of independent game developers running up to him, interrupting his lunch, and trying to pitch movie ideas to him. Poor old Steven Spielberg at the other table, he had to go out the back in order to avoid all these indie game developers. I was just sitting there trying to enjoy my coffee, and three of them mistook me for John Milius, came over and tried to pitch me a 3D isometric police station management Dirty Harry game. I mean, seriously, what's the world coming to? Yeah, actually, no. I don't think so somehow. I think Krafton are screwed. I think they bit off more than they can chew. They paid far more than they should have, and now they are desperately breaching contracts left, right and centre in order to get out of paying more. I think the second this case makes it into an actual courtroom, Krafton are going to be the unwelcome recipients of one of the biggest doses of legal surprise butt sex that we've seen this decade. And honestly, it really is starting to sound like they deserve it. While we're on the subject of surprise butt sex, I'd like to end this episode with a surprise birthday shout-out. This comes from Lawrence Kozak. He didn't actually tell me what the name of his wife is. That's the one thing that he neglected to mention in his email. But his wife's birthday is on August the 1st. He says, "This is my opportunity to chirp back at a spicy 5'2" Filipina who mocks me frequently. Whenever he's watching my videos and she hears me laughing, she, in a mocking imitation, tries to copy my laugh. Maybe you can set her straight and get her back into the salt mines. Well, I'd like to wish her, whatever her name is, a very, very happy birthday. And maybe, Lawrence, you never know, you'll get lucky and she'll get a dose of surprise butt sex." Please do let me know how she responds to that. And on that bombshell, that is it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. Hope you all enjoyed it. Hope it's given you something to laugh about. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.